And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Tuesday, March 25th, 2025. And this outlook will be for the midweek period, Wednesday and Thursday, starting with the state of the sea ice. Extensive ice across the central northern Bering with the pack ice along and just southwest of St. Matthew Island. We've reached pretty much the maximum extent of ice expected for this season. That usually happens here at the end of March, early April. And the fact we are going to see some below normal temperatures here early in April, the likelihood for the ice to persist. We had a pretty good northerly component to the wind here for the last several days, so that's even caused the ice to push a little further south, but those winds have relaxed. We have ice now all within Kuskokwim Bay and some that's tried to redevelop in through areas of Bristol Bay. But aside from that, as we go further east here in Cook Inlet, not much of anything. Daytime temperatures along Cook Inlet have been getting back up around or even a bit above 40 degrees, especially the Anchorage Bowl, western Kenai. And looking at the weather map for late this Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, weak area of low pressure southeast of Kodiak Island, a little trough kind of flinging back up along the outer Panhandle coast into the northern Gulf. And then this weakening front out across the Bering. It was once a gale force front, but as it's come east, it continues to weaken, and there'll be just this weak low circulation that'll be washing out by Wednesday afternoon and evening with a few snow showers. And then back here across the Gulf, a lagging trough. But of interest, we have this high pressure up in the Arctic Ocean with a ridge into northwest Canada. If I step out of the way, this is a stronger area of low pressure off of the U.S. lower 48 Pacific Northwest and Vancouver Island. This system between this low and the high that's to the north is going to create some stronger offshore flow across the Panhandle northeastern Gulf Coast as we go through Wednesday into Thursday. There could even be some locally stronger winds. That's why there's a high wind watch for the Juneau area. Downtown area could get those downslope winds, gusting as high as 40 to 50, maybe even 60 miles an hour as we go through Wednesday afternoon into Thursday afternoon. Still lagging trough of low pressure back across the Gulf. And then behind me, what takes hold is this high. High pressure, surface high pressure building around and north of the Aleutians into the lower Bering, up around 1040 millibars Thursday into Friday. After we get past this weekend, there are going to be a couple of frontal systems work their way across eastern Asia and the Bering Sea that will come into the west coast by April 1st with wind and snow. So stay tuned as a likely more stormy pattern will exist for areas of the west coast here to start the beginning of April. But taking a look at the southeast Panhandle inner channels on Wednesday, generally north winds 20 knots, waves running right around 4 feet, both Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage. For the areas along the outer coast, nearshore waters within 15 nautical miles. Sitka down through Craig, northeast to north winds 15 to 20 knots as we get outside the icy strait, and up there toward Yakutat, east northeast winds 10 knots. And then for Thursday, we do expect stronger winds, north winds to 30 knots. Could be gusty there within Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage, waves 5-6 feet. Northwest winds to 20 knots down here in Dixon Entrance. And then if we look at the outer coast, winds are going to still be offshore, easterly gust to 35 knots in the vicinity here of Prince of Wales Island. As we go up the coast from Sitka, Gustavus to Yakutat, generally northeast winds 20 to locally 25 knots. Northwestern Gulf, northeast winds at around 10 miles an hour in Cook Inlet with waves a couple of feet. Outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and along the eastern Kenai, generally northeast winds 15 knots. For Cook Inlet, north winds 10 knots, upper Cook and off of Anchor Point, but then northwesterly out of Kamishak Bay at 20 knots and 3-4 foot waves on Wednesday. For Thursday, north winds to 10 knots in Prince William Sound with waves a couple of feet. Variable winds around 10 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and along the eastern Kenai with waves a few feet there. And then northeast to north winds 10 to 20 knots upper to middle Cook Inlet, and then turning northwesterly to 30 knots out of Kamishak Bay into the area of Kennedy Entrance and the Barren Islands. You could be looking at 8-foot waves there. For Wednesday, Kodiak Island will generally see north winds at 15 to 20 knots. Those winds along the North Pacific side will be northwesterly 20 to 25 knots, falling off to 15 knots off of False Pass. And then on the Bering side, generally northwest winds 10 to 15 knots, though becoming variable as you get down toward Cold Bay and the eastern Aleutians. For Thursday, those winds are going to pick up again. We're looking at northwest winds 20 to 25 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island. Northwest winds 30 knots along the North Pacific side of the peninsula with waves 4 to 6 feet. And then for Bristol Bay and especially outside of there, north winds to 30 knots with waves running 8 to 10 feet. For the eastern Aleutians on Wednesday, northwest winds 20 knots, becoming west and variable, Atka to Adak, and then as we get west of Adak, especially toward Kiska and Shemya, southwest winds of 15 knots. And then on Thursday, as that high takes shape here over the central Aleutians near and west of Adak, just variable winds there around 10 knots. But across the central eastern Aleutians from Atka through Unalaska, winds will be northerly and as strong as 30 knots in the vicinity of Unalaska Dutch Harbor. For the southwest coast, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots out of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. Along the lower Yukon Delta and Norton Sound, winds will be northerly at 10 to 15 knots. Westerly winds just 15 knots around the Pribilovs, but southeast winds to 20 knots there in the vicinity of St. Matthew. And on Thursday, we expect winds to pick up within Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay, north to northwest winds 30 knots. And then as we go up the coast, winds could be 20 knots along the lower Yukon coast, especially around Hooper Bay to the north side of Nunavik Island at Makoriuk, and just northwesterly winds to 10 knots within that wider expanse of Norton Sound. For areas south of the Bering Strait, west side of the Seward Peninsula, north side of St. Lawrence Island, northeast winds to 10 knots. Generally north winds, lower Chukchi Sea, but turning westerly into Kotzebue Sound. And as we get up along the Arctic coast from Wainwright, especially toward Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik, look for east-northeast winds 20 to as high as 25 knots there at Kaktovik. And on Thursday, winds will continue east-northeast around 20 knots at Kaktovik and Prudhoe Bay. And then as we drop them down from Utqiagvik to off of Cape Lisburne, northeast winds to 15 knots before those turn more toward the northwest, 10 to 15 knots. Lower Chukchi Sea into Kotzebue Sound. And then finally, once we get through the Bering Strait, the west side of the Seward Peninsula and north side of St. Lawrence Island, on Thursday we're looking at northwesterly winds at 10 to 15 knots.